Thank you, Amrish ji. Thank you, RT Forum, to include me in this conversation. We have had some excellent observations from Shantaji and Kishorji regarding a number of dimensions. What I propose to do is to focus almost entirely on issues relating to provisioning, financing, etc.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this is an issue on which almost everybody in the world is agreed that unless you have adequate resources for education, it doesn't take you anywhere. In fact, if you recall the manifesto of BJP just before it came to power as NDA 2, it says most powerful tool for advancement of the nation and the most potent weapon to fight poverty is education and must be taken very seriously. Now, how do you take it seriously? If you do not provide for it, obviously there is no question of any seriousness, right? That is the context we need to keep in mind. RT has done a large number of studies over the years, essentially telling us that if we look at something very basic, most elementary, which is are schools RTE compliant? We are talking of elementary schools for which we have had right to education. And it is such a massive tragedy that you're talking of barely 10%, 12% of schools being RTE compliant. Let me also stress here that in any case, the way RTE norms were designed, the way they were arrived at, in a sense, we were looking at almost a minimalist approach. It is not the case that those norms were calculated with the kind of what I may consider, or many of you would consider, adequate provisioning. Right? And I'll come to that in a minute. Right? What do we mean by adequate provisioning? Right? But before that, this in a sense tells you a complete mayhem that we have with respect to public provisioning of education when you have close to 90% schools or so, which are not RTE compliant, which is not to say that private sector has schools which are all RTE compliant. In fact, if you look at the bottom half there, probably it is much worse than what we have in the public sector. For a variety of reasons, again, let me not get into details of it, but essentially we have had a situation where there has been a mushrooming of absolutely low quality private institutions as well. So, this simple binary which is sometimes put in public domain that there is a mushrooming of private schools because the quality there is better, is an extremely simplistic and indefensible kind of idea in its own right. We can talk about many other issues there, as Kishorji was talking about. So this is the first point we need to, in fact, acknowledge, that public provisioning has been horrible, which of course then, for certain segments of the population who can afford it, it pushes privatization and private schools. Also, unfortunately, it has been very much a part of our political economy of education in this country, where the elected representatives have actually got into the business of education on a large scale. So if you look at most of these institutions, in particular higher education, where you have huge returns to be made, but also in schools, you have all these elected representatives in hordes, both in North India, South India, and so on, but much more so in southern part of the country, and so on. So this whole issue of provisioning, in fact, over the years has actually become weaker as the country has become economically stronger, right? I studied in a village school with a, chatia, which I used to take there and so on when I started. for 3-4 years, 5 years or so. I'm sure Ashok ji, Shanta ji, etc. would have had similar experiences. So there was a functioning system which was taken care of, and hence when we talk of resources, then we also need to talk about what are the other complementary resources. Quality of teachers, etc. But let me not get into those details right away. But this is something which has to be the starting point, and this is something which did not start with COVID. This is something which has been there for a very long time. Right? As it happens, the situation has worsened. That is the important point. And Professor Amartya Sen recently, in one of his articles, put it very well that India is probably the only country in the world which wishes to be an economic superpower without taking care of its education and health needs. Right? In fact, if we look at what has, as I said, happening over the years, it's a serious sort of challenge that we're talking about. Right? Now, if Kishorji was comparing with some countries in the developing world, China, Indonesia, we can globally do a comparison. And if you just do a table of, sort of what you can call unit cost for education, developed countries, developing countries, almost everybody beats us hollow. What we spend on education per child, and this should be the yardstick, the benchmark by which we should judge the public provisioning or the provisioning for education in general. Right? Our unit costs are laughable. Right? I mean, what we, per child expenditure, etc. So if you just do a comparison, and there are lots of studies which are there. So let me not get into details of these, but that is the bottom line. Basic benchmark, what we provide, let's say, for different aspects, whether it is, let's say, teachers training or anything. You just name any of those things. Right? You find that our effort, and in the aggregate as well, is something which is among the worst in the world. Countries which are much poorer than us, right, in sub-Saharan Africa, in terms of unit costs, are actually doing much better. Now that is the huge tragedy. And that tragedy has, of course, become very much part of the political economy of development, and in particular, political economy of education. MC Chagla, Muhammad Karim Chagla, our education minister, 1966, at the time of the Kothari report, he had said that it is a huge tragedy that we put our children in hovels. In hovels, this is the phrase that he used, in the name of education. Right? We just put them there and hope that things will become better. No, of course not. Right? So that recognition has been there all through, that look, we need to do a lot more. And then we have been talking about, as everybody in this conversation knows, 6%, etc. on education. Right? So, but where have we been? I mean, if you look at, let's say, the last 5 years, 10 years, right? We're basically talking of somewhere, the aggregate as a percentage of GDP, we are talking of less than 4%, between 3 and 4%. If you look at the allocation by the union government, in fact, if you just look at 2014-15 and the most recent estimate, it came down from about 0.64% to about 0.45% or so, right? Now, that itself is going down. This brings to my second point, which I want to highlight in the context of provisioning and financing, etc. Essentially, what has happened after the second Finance Commission, 14th Finance Commission, is that union government has decided that states should bear more and more financial responsibility for education. And the argument was that, with the 14th Finance Commission recommendations, states will get more untied fund from 32% to 42%. If that is happening, then there was a second step which was taken, which was completely wrong, that now states will have more resources. Yes, indeed, there was an untying of resources, okay? But in terms of aggregate, if you look at what has happened to the states as a share, There has been no noticeable increase in the share of states' resources. What actually has happened is that states have become much more vulnerable, especially after GST, Goods and Services Tax, now which we have seen in the last 3 months. In fact, in the huge financial package that presumably this package, which was a stimulus, etc., which was a joke on population of this country. If you have any questions, I can give you details, etc. Right? But this whole so-called 20 lakh crore was yet another of those, multi-million jumlas. Right? Effectively, there was very little which actually has been part of fiscal stimulus and so on and so forth. But coming back to the point that I wanted to sort of underscore, if you look at the GST which needed to be transferred by the union government from December to March, even that had not been transferred to the state governments by April, or in fact till date. Now you can say that, okay, March COVID hit us, but what was happening? Why is it that December to March there is no transfer, right? So what happens to the states in the current crisis when they're trying to take care of challenges emanating from COVID? They have been flattened. Their own resources, they have come down to something like 10 to 20% of what they were raising every month. But given the lockdown and multiple dimensions of it, that has simply crashed, right? Center is not even giving them the sort of dues which have been there for earlier months as well, right? So this thinking that states will do more, 14th Finance Commission recommendations, but then subsequently GST, etc., on the whole has made states much more vulnerable to any financial shock, because their economic basis for raising resources has decreased very considerably, right? If that happens, then what can the states do? And since much of the thing has to be done by the states, most of the responsibilities are handled by the state, it's just a bizarre situation that we are caught in, right? So this was one major thing. So basically, union government is saying that states should do more and more, and if they're not doing, it's their problem. Who cares? Education is not necessarily our responsibility, even if it is in the concurrent list. And that is the mindset which was a very significant change with NDA2. Right? The other very significant change with NDA2 was again a very bizarre thing in terms of resources, that there is no relationship between input and output. Financial provisioning is not something which is a very important prerequisite for quality education. Now, can anything be more bizarre than that? Right? In fact, this is a statement, there is a paper by Niti Aayog, which says that inputs don't matter as much as people talk about. States already have resources and they can't use that, they can't spend that, and so on and so forth, right? So we should not be worrying about that. We should look at other things to ensure how education can be taken care of, and so on. So these very explicit shifts, which have happened in the recent years, is something we need to keep on the front burner to understand what is happening to provisioning for education across the country. Again, some states are doing better than others. I'm not getting into those details right now. The third thing, which again was a terrible move, the way I understand, was to sort of, introduce Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan, and I'm talking of a terrible move from the point of view of guaranteed provisioning, right? Neither pre-primary school nor secondary school was brought into the ambit of right to education, right? But basically, the allocations now are now made for this entire combined Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan, effectively then weakening whatever we had as the right to education even at the elementary level. Right? Now that is something that we need to certainly keep in mind. Right? Then we have had so much talk about this national policy and education. We have been kind of hearing a great deal about it. As Shantaji said, there is maybe a small ray of hope there, saying that, okay, we will also take care of the secondary education. But apart from that, effectively, it is a document for further privatization. It is a document essentially saying that, look, this is not going to be our responsibility, leaving it more and more to the market and so on. Right? So that is a sort of basic message. Those of you who have read that document carefully would certainly know it, but we can talk more about it. The next thing, this whole issue of digitalization, which was touched upon. Now, of course, nobody says that technology should not be used and so on and so forth. But how do you use that technology, and how do you bring that into the domain and the context of what could be quality education and so on? Right? So in general, there are lots of those issues. But as Kishorji emphasized, there is this huge challenge of inequalities in terms of access to technology itself. Right? And especially in emergency situation, you're saying that, okay, this is the only way to go forward and so on. Obviously, the exclusion would be that much more pronounced. Right? So that is something which we need to keep in mind. This government, since 2014, NDA 2, NDA 3, both of these have had this fascination, obsession for digitalization, as if digitalization is the answer to most of India's very basic problems. You do that, corruption will disappear. You do that, quality education can be imparted. What world are we living in? Right? Again, let me sort of certainly emphasize, nobody is opposed to the use of technology in good quality education. Of course, that has to be the case. But, can that become a substitute? Can that be, an alternative? That is the real question, and so on and so forth. Okay, I think I've taken a lot of time, so let me just try and conclude. In the context of COVID, what is that? In terms of its implication for, in general, for our economy, what COVID has done is to strip the stark and naked reality of this country in terms of multiple fault lines, in terms of massive inequalities. Now, you see that something like 70-80% of the population is without anything in terms of past savings or any assured means of livelihood. Forget about education. To begin with, just that to keep your body and soul intact, we have seen all that. In fact, in terms of the impact, adverse impact on population at large in this country, this is many times worse than demonetization, right? And the recovery time is going to be that much longer. Right? Now, from the point of view of education, what does this mean? Right? Essentially, we are setting back. Education, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of provisioning, etc., has never been the priority of, in particular, this government, but also many other previous governments. They didn't take it seriously, right? The adequate seriousness was not there, right? Yes, we talk of RT, we do SSA, we do all kinds of things, but then, we also realize that if 90% schools are not RT compliant, there is a huge problem in terms of, what you're professing and what you're actually doing, right? But this is something which is going to set us back with respect to education, by several years, precisely because the recovery itself is going to sort of take time. So what about all the lost children, right? Children who, in fact, there's a mini generation which is going to get impacted in an adverse fashion, in a much more aggravated fashion, right? As I said earlier, as Shantaji mentioned, that we should be looking at out of school children and not things like enrollment and so on, because that's utterly misleading, right? But many million more have become out of school. Most of them are unlikely to come back very soon. That is something which we need to understand, right? Because there is almost nothing in terms of even thinking. You have to have at least a basic philosophy, right? Of how do we reach them? How do we ensure that what to cater for, how to cater for, etc. Right? I think for the economy itself, as I said, which is supposed to be a much bigger challenge in everyone's imagination currently, we are at utter loss, right? What is being done is more of political stunt, right? More of, trying to sort of get into certain kinds of messaging without having anything on the ground. Education is much more on the sidelines right now. And at least for half a generation or so who are currently in the school or so, I can see that this has had massive kind of implications for them. Let me stop here. I would be very happy to respond to your clarifications, questions, etc. should you have any. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir, Dr. Praveen Jha. Now we are, our time is flying. So I would request Srijita to just pass on the questions which is already come into at the chat box and start the second session. Yeah.
Yes, so we will take another 10 to 15 minutes to address many of the questions that have been raised in the chat box. So one question which is constantly coming up, especially from the side of parents, the parents who are participating in this webinar, I think Dr. Kishore Singh could perhaps address these questions because it's mostly related to privatization of education. So the questions that have come up is online education is being introduced for all classes from nursery to class 12, and this is being done just to impose the fees from the parents. While there is a salary cut which is being faced by the middle class, the businesses are also shut down. Should the private schools not waive the fees completely in such a situation? Since the private schools already have a contingency fund, should it not be used in emergencies like this? This is one question which has come up from a number of parents whose children are in private schools. There's another question which has come up is the private schools, instead of prescribing NCERT textbooks, they have been prescribing books by private publishers which are costing way more. So Professor Dr. Kishore Singh, if you could please answer these questions.
Hello.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Thank you.
Yes.
I'm very pleased that these questions were put. First of all, let me come back to say that if we are respectful of India's international obligations under human rights conventions, if we are respectful of our constitution and constitutional provisions, and if we are respectful of our own philosophic traditions in education and our civilizational values and spiritual heritage, there is absolutely no place for privatization in education. The primary core responsibility of education is of public authorities. Many countries this is so. Some countries which are introducing privatization are going in wrong direction legally and morally. But since there is mushrooming of privatization, there's a lot of expansion of such kind of schools with the false publicity of quality and many other considerations which are ill-founded. Let me say the first thing parents should do and civil society should do is to claim education is a right and say to the public authorities, to inspectors of schools, to local authorities, states, union authorities, that please provide education because it is our right, and as Professor Jha said, please provide educational, proper provisioning of education in terms of financial support. That is lacking. I am absolutely sure that if proper resources are devoted to education, there is a possibility of enlarging public school system and then slowly to wipe out, to diminish, eliminate privatization. But this is not being done because resources for education are being diminished and budget is inadequate, it is being reduced, and result is that privatization is growing. There is absolutely no reason for parents to opt for privatization and private schools simply because there is a huge propaganda. OECD, even respected organization, has totally found it untenable, incorrect. But what is more important is the question of fee. I think that even if, for whatever reason, children are being sent to private schools, there are huge issues of fee. We should claim that there must be a reasonable amount of fee to be charged. For example, our bottom line should be what is the minimum wages, and if a poor family wants to send children to private schools, how much should be fee? And accordingly, the exorbitant fee that private schools are charging must be drastically regulated, and there is absolutely no reason to allow them total freedom to impose the fee. And also the textbooks, as you said, provision of textbook, including digital devices, is international obligation as part of right to education, and therefore it is responsibility of state, public authorities, NCERT. We have mechanisms in the first place to prescribe textbooks, in the second place to enforce the system on private schools. As I said already, privatization prepares us to be a consumer citizen and a good corporate citizen. Imbibe corporate culture. Try to learn to say hi instead of namaste, and the values which are totally materialistic values and deprived of humanistic mission of education. And therefore, there is a need to try to look into the phenomena of fees, but also the phenomena of textbooks, and what is the education content there, who is teaching, what kind of teachers, where are they trained, so on and so forth. So this is a huge term of campaign which we need to engage in. But allow me 1 second more to point out something which I did not say, but which is absolutely, I think, important for us to consider, and that is the fraudulent practices in privatization of education. I'm absolutely sure, on the basis of my investigation report to United Nations General Assembly and elsewhere, that most of the accounts in developing countries, including India, in all private schools, I say it emphatically, are absolutely fraud and false. You need simply to look into, for example, we talk a lot of online education, digitalization, look into the sites. Today, can you believe in India, for example, you can obtain a PhD by paying 5 lakh rupees? Can you believe that a degree can be obtained, a job can be got on the basis of false, fraudulent practice of privatization? Can you believe that huge amount of resources are amassed? Vidya has become vyapar, and still those privatization people pose philanthropic, say समाज की सेवा कर रहे हैं, and plead with the government to pay them, and government pays them subsidy. Instead of paying subsidy to private schools, why can't government expand public education system? So I think that I would most forcefully put this argument for all parents, all civil society organizations, anybody, all philanthropists, please try to uproot the phenomenon of privatization when education has become a business. विद्या को किसी भी हालत में व्यापार मत बनने दीजिए. And then be very much aware of the right to education and rights of the parents and of the child. And if unfortunately you have to send children to private schools, claim those rights and go and try collectively through parents association, other means that you have, to say that do not do this kind of fraudulent practices. Show off the accounts. We want to see how you get the money, how you spend, what is the salary of teachers. Can you believe that a teacher is signed a false certificate bill to receive the salary? Not all teachers are paid the salary that the private school bookkeeping keeps, private schools and their management. So the question is to make a law, a policy, if ideally that is possible, which is centered around regulatory system, which is prescriptive, prohibitory and penal, criminal. There are countries like Singapore where, for example, employing unqualified teachers in private school, financial fraud is a crime. In India, we totally overlook. So I'm sorry, I've taken a lot of time, the shortage of time, but I'm very, very concerned with these issues, and I think we need to launch a big national campaign in order to fight this evil, which is killing our spirit of education, the cause of education, and whole system of education. If it is allowed to develop on these lines, will make India a totally business-oriented, unbridled corporate sector without any respect for any Indian values, for any international obligations of India, and above all, with great disrespect for our constitutional system. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. So we'll take a question for Dr. Shanta Sinha. So the question has come from Ponenika Ray from NFIW. She talks about how do we reach the children who do not have access to online teaching. Is it possible to push for provisioning of free computers and Wi-Fi through the government, which will address both the short-term needs as well as the long-term need for the children? There is a similar question from Sloka Sinha, who is asking about if there's a way of using digital technology in a democratic manner to reach the children without access to online technology.
First of all, let me tell you, I have got nothing against technology. But then, if technology is provided for all equally, it makes sense. We made a survey of 8,000 villages in Bihar to look at the policy which Bihar government has on introducing Doordarshan and online teaching for children from primary school onwards. Of the 8,000, only 2,000 had access to electricity in their homes. The rest didn't have access to anything. And even that was intermittent. They didn't have access to online. Even the telephones were not 4G. Even the 2G was interrupted. So what are you talking about technology for these children? First, I think let them have a school with, as Praveen Jha has stated, or as Kishore Singh ji has stated, let us have a school with full endowment of resources. Let there be provisioning of schools. Let's demand for that. School is a public good. Let us have government schools fully strengthened, full with all resources. And then, of course, all these facilities that they are online and anything else can be added as a complement to this, but certainly not a substitute to a regular school. It just cannot substitute to a school. This will certainly add to the value to the existing school, but how can it substitute for the existing school? Even for the poor, they deserve the kind of school our children go to, and let's fight for it. And these schools will have to be public schools, and our children should also be going to those schools. Let's have a school where all seek admission, where all go, where there is no inequities in education. Right now, I'm afraid there is an apartheid in education. The biggest divide is in the society is between those who have been to schools and those who have not been to schools. If there has to be a closure of this apartheid, government must be serious. I will end with saying what Praveen Jha has said, Professor Praveen Jha, what Kishore Singh ji has said, that you have to be serious about education in the country. There is total lack of consensus in this country, especially among the elite, that education is important for children and for India's democracy and India's development. They just don't seem to be caring. They never cared, now they don't care at all. And if this is a situation, I'm afraid sub-Saharan Africa will overtake India. We will no longer be talking about the great Indian empire, the great Indian economy, the great Indian self-tradition. We will look to Somalia to find out what we have to learn from them to make Indian schools better.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. So we have a question for Professor Praveen Jha. So the question is from Yasmin. She is asking, what will it take in terms of provisioning for education to put universal elementary education on track post the COVID lockdown? So just a second, I will unmute her. Unmute. Yes.
All right. Again, a serious, careful estimation needs to be done. We don't even know the extent of damage which will be done, is being done in terms of what will be required to rebuild people's lives. Because education is not something which you disconnect with everything else that a household needs, right? How do you sort of factor education also in that larger complex whole, etc. So it will take some time. But in any case, I'm sure you have heard it repeatedly that our goal was 6% of GDP. We have never been anywhere close to that, right? The deficit has been at least 2% at the best of times, right? Now, this will only aggravate it, the resource requirements, given the difficulties, the challenges, how many households have actually fallen through the cracks, fallen through, all these very difficult kind of circumstances into penury and so on and so forth. So what kind of a comprehensive resource package for education is required? That we need to think of. And that, to my mind, is something which needs to be worked out carefully. I do not want to just float a number for the sake of it. But I think we need to begin with, what we already know in terms of the gaps in resources that we have, unit costs being so low, some 800,000 or 8 lakh teachers being untrained. If you just go norm by norm, right, lots of estimations have been there. What is it that is required to take care of the deficit? RT Forum has been doing some of these exercises, sort of the extent of the shortfall and so on and so forth. So my sense is it would be anywhere between, let's say, 2 to 3% if we go by conservative norms. I'm not talking of the same kind of facilities, same kind of provisioning which you have, let's say, in OECD countries. Right? Now, incidentally, in OECD countries, more than 90% of schools, even today, after all this liberalization and so on, okay, continue to be what is known as government schools. Right? Overwhelming majority of children go there, and those schools are doing kind of a fantastic job. So you have to keep that in mind as well. Finally, where will the resources come from? If you have a will, there is a way. There is no dearth of sort of possibilities. There are lots of ideas. I would request some of you to look at Center for Budget and Governance Accountability, which is a major governance and budgetary initiative reflecting on budgets of different governments, etc., of which Shantaji used to be president, continues to be in the board of that. It has given lots of ideas, how to raise resources. So since we don't have time, I'm not getting into details of it, but it is not a problem, right, if we want to move on that particular. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So we just have a couple of minutes left. So one question to which probably Professor Shanta Sinha could answer is what are the alternatives to online education, since we are taking into cognizance the digital divide? There has been a number of questions, a number of people who are asking this question. So what are the alternatives to digital education to ensure that children remain within the ambit of education, since schools will remain closed for another couple of months? Professor Shanta Sinha, if you could answer.
I think asking a wrong question will give you a wrong answer. Because you've posed the question of digital divide, digital education as an alternative to education. It is certainly not an alternative. So you will have to look at the politics of this digitalization of education and even posing it as an alternative. I mean, let's look, I will have to take another half an hour session on this. I think the core is strengthening education. And as I began, I said it is okay if schools close for another 2 months. I'm perfectly all right with it. At least you're acknowledging schools are important and you're publicly stating it is closing for 2 months. We'll reopen it later after COVID and children are to come. But if you're doing it, if you're not acknowledging the schools are important, then you're sending a message that, look, after COVID, let us do this digitalization as an alternative. I have a problem with the way the question itself is posed. And as I told you, this digitalization or online is very, I think, it takes away the notion of the debate on what is education, why education, of what the purpose of education, the goal of education. It somewhere limits it to only some reading and writing and doing some mathematics. And there are profound theories on what is education and the goal of education. None of that will be resolved through this process of some mantra of online education. You want me to give another lecture? I can.
Ma'am, there is another question for you. It is about gender-sensitive strategies for universalization of education post-COVID-19 pandemic.
I think this is a very, very important question. We have full evidence to show how vulnerable girls, children have been during the COVID, and how much of burden of work there is at a household because because of gender discrimination and patriarchy. Also, the way girls are being pushed to work in agriculture. There are many girls who are young, who are not even 18, who are now pushed to doing NREGA work. And there is instances of violence and abuse on girls. So I think this is a serious issue. This will also, I think, put girls to risk who are already going to school and who have come, perhaps there could be greater number of school dropouts. We will have to be very aware. We will have to create double awareness and double tracking of girls to see that their aspirations for education continues. Let me tell you, no girl who has gone to school would like to get out of school. Girls want to be in school. They see justice only be in school. So let us give full support and tell her that we are all with you, and express solidarity with her and tell her that you exercise agency, we are with you, we will see that you go to school. Once the schools reopen, there will have to be a verification of attendance register. Track every child whose name is there in the attendance register and get every child back to school. This is the exercise that has to be taken in all schools in the country. I mean, there cannot be any question of girls being out of school.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for elaborating it. So I think it's already 1 o'clock and we will have to end this now. So I would just invite Amrish ji to thank the panelists.
Okay, so thank you for your deliberations, Santa ji, Dr. Praveen Jha, Dr. Kishore Singh ji. Thank you very much, so much for the participation, for address the webinar and the participants also. We are just this online discussion. RT Forum is taken up very seriously because this is again a segregation of majority of the children through this online, and they want to legitimize the home schooling, and that is that is a threat for the school and our education system and equitable and quality education for what we are struggling since decades. So we are organizing a meeting with Teachers Association because nobody is asking the opinion of teachers. And MHRD is not asking, no state governments are in the conversation with the Teachers Association. So we are organizing a consultation with teachers on these critical issues emerged after this COVID-19 pandemic, and we will evolve a consensus on this issue, and that is on 24th. So that is information I want to give all of you, and thank you for coming, and thank you for joining this webinar. Thank you once again. Thank you.